Hey everybody, this is Nate Swick once again here with Greg Neise for our weekly Bird ID live session while we are all here doing our, I don't know, we're doing our self-isolating thing. And it just occurred to me as I was putting this up that I forgot to set up the the PowerPoint presentation that I usually do on the next screen. So I need to do that real quickly. And I also need to turn my sound off over here. So, Greg, how are you doing? And if you could please talk for about 3 minutes while I get this PowerPoint presentation set up, and then we'll get going. But how's your self isolating going? There's been a lot of migration happening right now. Have you been seeing that?
No,
No.
we are sitting in a snowstorm at the moment,
Oh my goodness.
um, and as I think we'll see in a couple of more minutes here when you get the presentation for today's setup, uh, Illinois is being bisected by a storm system, which could have some pretty interesting birding implications. But yeah, it's been there's been a couple of interesting vagrants. There was a Townsend's warbler found
I
yesterday,
saw that. I saw that.
very near Chicago. I know there's people out looking for it right now.
I hope they're distancing.
Um, they are distancing. We take that very seriously here. Uh, it's actually been pretty astounding how seriously, especially Chicagoans, are taking this. I mean, it's a ghost town out here.
Wow,
You
that's
know,
wild.
I see, I see pictures and video from other cities, and I mean, even like the most Michigan Avenue, which on just any normal day, doesn't matter what day of the week it is, just any normal day,
Yeah.
365 days a year, at about noon, you cannot walk down that street without touching someone. It's
Huh.
impossible.
I know. I've only
And
been to Chicago a few times, but I do recall Michigan Avenue being a very busy place.
yeah, and a couple of weeks ago, I think a week ago or so, somebody photographed a coyote trotting down Michigan Avenue down the middle of the street.
That's
And
wild.
there's nobody, there's no cars, there's nothing at noon on a like Tuesday. It's
Yeah.
pretty crazy. Um,
Yeah, we have reported a lot of birders saying that they've gotten their first big push of migrants here in North Carolina, and the map that you we're going to look at a little bit. You've shown some weather maps that that I'm going to share with everybody because I know you're watching the radar, and we can see. Well, it hasn't been huge here yet, but we're getting things like prothonotary warbler, black-throated green warbler. Uh, the early spring migrants are starting to trickle in. It's still a few weeks away before we start getting the big the long distance birds, but the ones that are wintering in Central America are definitely pushing their way into the southern part of the U.S. So if you are up there in the cold and snowy Great Lakes area or north, or even out west, I saw our colleague Ted Floyd in Boulder is dealing with a lot of snow as well. Um,
yeah.
they're coming. They're coming. They're on their way. We did have some nasty weather a few days ago, but it's been turning around. The winds are out of the south and the birds are flying. Anyway, I've got my PowerPoint
Yeah.
set up now, so we
Okay.
can switch to
Yeah,
that whenever you want.
I'm still trying to get this watch party going on my end. Uh it's kind of, for whatever reason, doesn't seem like it's going, or there's usually when I start it, it's people pop right in, and
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason this one doesn't seem to be, well, no, it's up. I guess people are just doing something else.
Yeah. What else
Um
do we got to do? We're all
oh, we
stuck at
got
home.
Serge. Oh, we got Serge. We got, all right, we got Serge from Costa Rica popping in to say hello. Hi,
Yeah. So
Serge.
if you have any
Um
questions about birding, bird ID, what you're saying, comments about birding in this social isolating era, please leave in the comments. We're happy to talk about them. We're putting this in the What's This Bird group just because that's the place where we normally do ID stuff. But we are open to talking about any aspect of birding. Please leave some comments. We'd be happy to chat with you and how check in with how you're doing. Please let us know how you're doing. I hope you're doing all right. But I'm going to switch over to the PowerPoint presentation. Wallace Johnson
yeah.
asks, Before we go, we got a question. So I'm gonna go to Wallace Johnson. He asks, "What is the best way to learn bird songs?" We get this question almost every time, but we'll answer it again.
Sure.
There are some apps that are available, and unfortunately, they're only available on iOS, so they're not available for Android phones. But Larkwire is our favorite one to suggest. It's a paid app. It's a little expensive as apps go, but it essentially turns learning bird songs into a game, uh, which makes it a lot easier and helps you stay motivated.
And it is so worth. I forget what it is, $9 or $19, whatever it
Yeah,
is. It is so worth the money. And the developers really know their stuff. It's really fantastic.
yeah, yeah. I have a question from someone on Periscope. Which we're probably gonna punt on. Just FYI, Aiden from Aiden Perkins too. He asks identification of stints? Question mark. If it's a red-necked one,
Well,
they're red.
well, so are little stints.
That's true. Yeah, I guess that's true.
Um,
Fortunately, we in North America we don't have to deal with stints too much. We've got our hands full with our calidrus sandpipers that are actually moving right now. So there's a lot of them across, especially the middle part of the continent.
I will say this that last summer Illinois got its first stint of any kind, a little stint in it was a fresh juvenile, I believe, if I
Hmm.
remember correctly. Um, and I think that for birders on this side of the pond, most of the time, I mean, there's never any hard fast rules with any of this, especially when you get into birds like stints or Epidonyx flycatchers or whatever. But typically, when you see a stint, you know it because it's not that it just doesn't check any of the boxes
Yeah.
well. So when you're like running down the list of, the peeps that it could be, it's just not checking any of the boxes, or at least not well enough to give you any confidence. So then you go into the rare stuff.
Yeah, and this is obviously coming from a North American perspective. You on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, for that matter, have the complete opposite issue because you're looking at things that don't look like your regular stints. So you'll see
Oh, I did.
red-necked and little stint. He maybe I don't know. He didn't tell me his location,
I
but
didn't. Oh, I didn't realize that was somebody from Europe or. But yeah, I mean, I would imagine the same thing holds true
yeah,
for.
the key is getting
Uh,
familiar with your regular ones, and then the unusual ones are more likely to stand out when you see them.
Absolutely, and
And
that
fingers
holds true
crossed.
for all burning.
And fingers
Sean
crossed it's in
Mills
a
says
really
hi.
obvious plumage, which is a big help too.
Hi to Sean, who's giving us a wave, and
Yeah, Sean
Serge is giving.
Mills, Foul Mouths podcast. You should listen to that. I'll give a
Yeah,
shout out to
and
them.
Sean's or Serge is giving us a wave on top of saying hi from Costa Rica.
Is this in your watch party, Greg?
Yeah, it is.
I'm gonna keep it. You got to keep an eye on that one. I'm gonna keep an eye on the main feed on what's this bird.
Yep.
Jay Worley has a good question here in the comments. He says we just had a piping plover in western North Carolina, not banded. Would this likely be a Great Lakes bird or an Atlantic coast bird? That is a great question, and my suspicion is that is probably a Great Lakes bird rather than an Atlantic coast bird because those are the ones that will migrate overland. I can give an anecdote. We had a piping plover here in Greensboro, where I live in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is in the western Piedmont, so the western half of the middle of the state. And it was banded, and it was one of the Great Lakes birds. It was identified as one of the birds that was banded around the Great Lakes. So those are the ones that are going to be more likely to travel overland. The Atlantic
And
coast nesters, they're going to stay close to the coast, even in migration.
and it could have been one of Monty and Rose's kids because neither
Absolutely.
one of them were banded.
Yeah, Monty and Rose, the famous Montrose, Chicago area nesting piping plovers that nested on a heavily used beach this past summer. All right, so let's get to the meat of our little deal here. Greg, I'm going to throw these images that you sent me earlier today over, and this is the radar image. Looks like the NORAD image from last night. Can you tell us what you're seeing here that's so interesting? The black one. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, the first image of the thing I sent you. Mm-hmm.
area. Um, Wait, people are saying they can't hear me.
Yeah, I got you back on now. So go ahead and repeat what you said for the
Okay.
last 30 seconds.
Is Greg's sound? Is my sound back on?
You're back on. You're back
Sure.
on.
I am. Okay. Now people are still saying unmute. I don't.
It's because they're on a delay.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to start over with that.
Yep.
Uh, so
Greg, what are
what
you
we're looking.
seeing on this on this image?
Gotcha. Okay. So what we're looking at here is a composite NORAD image of the continental United States, and you'll notice that from North Florida to South Texas, and then sort of moving up into an open triangle shape north of St. Louis. There's all these blobs, these blue donut shaped blobs, and what those are migrating birds being picked up as they fly over radar installations. So you'll notice there's a little black dot in the middle of each one, and that is directly straight up from the radar installation where it can't see. So what you're seeing is the birds approaching and then flying over and then flying away. And because the radar installation is aimed up in a cone like this, as the birds fly into the cone, they are more scattered, and then as they fly over the top, anyways, that's what we're looking at. What's interesting about this situation last night is that there's a storm cutting them off right at the north, right up in across central Illinois and northern Missouri.
And I'm gonna
And
I'm gonna switch to that second slide, Greg, that has the
okay,
two other images that you sent me right now.
yep,
That has the NORAD and also the Windy TM,
okay.
windy.com, I guess
Is
now.
is that up now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so on the left you'll see basically the same image with the storm cutting across northern Illinois. But now look at the wind map, and the wind map um, is you see this. This is at 3,000 feet, and you see basically this big wide conveyor belt of wind going right up to where the storms are, and then circles around the low pressure point of the center of that storm. But what happens when you see this is the birds migrating ride that train up, and when they hit that storm, it's like a wall, and they just stop. And so
Hmm.
that's what we're seeing. And I would imagine that birders in the St. Louis area and what we call in Illinois Forgotonia, which is the far western side of the state, um, south of the snow, are going to have a really good day out there today. And anyone south of that storm is probably going to see new birds. But right along that edge, where the storm stops their northward progress, it can be gangbusters if you hit it just right.
Yeah. So if there's anyone here in the who's watching in the St. Louis area who is, maybe watching this, or if they're not out birding, and they almost probably should be birding as well as they as much as they can right now. Maybe even from their home, it's probably pretty
Yeah,
good.
we
I
don't.
said like Springfield, Illinois area looks like it's kind of in the middle there, and
Yep.
all the way to uh, what is it, Evanston, Indiana? I don't know my Indiana.
There's Evansville, and
Evansville.
and
That's
Goose
right.
Goose Pond,
Yeah.
which is right north of there, Linton, Indiana, and then um, across into looks like Iowa might not do so well. Depends on
Yeah.
I think I took this screenshot maybe at 1 o'clock in the morning or something like that. I forget
Hmm.
what it was. Um, but we don't like to use the word fallout here without good reason. But this kind of a setup is what can cause a real fallout.
Yeah, especially if it organizes against like a natural boundary, like a coastline or a mountain range or something like that. More so than sort of like
Precisely.
the middle of Illinois, Indiana. Although that's corn country, so there's not a ton of habitat, and those woodlots where you might find those small woodlots where little patches of habitat might be really really good in that part of the country right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
absolutely. And even the scrub, like the woody scrub that grows along drainage ditches in
Hmm.
the corn
Oops, sorry
ag
about that.
desert can be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, so I did have one comment from our friend Nick Lund, the birdist on Periscope. He mentions, oh, this is
Yo, Nick.
back to the stint discussion that we had. He notes that what about the Catherine Hamilton stint Piper Gaps notch trick that was on our blog, our ABA website back in 2013? Yeah, I mean that's definitely. I don't know if I think there was some once Catherine posted that there was a lot. So Catherine Hamilton is an artist. She lives in California now, artist and a very good birder as well. And she noted on specimens this little notch, this little gap notch. Gape notch in the bills of stints versus North American Calidris sandpipers, and it seemed to like hold up pretty well. I think the consensus ended up being that while it wasn't like a sure thing, surefire 100% ID clue, it's one of those things that if you see that, that is a really good suggestion that you might be looking at something unusual.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's start with some sandpipers and shorebirds in general. We get to start with a bird that I screwed up on. So this is the second in a what is turning into a regular theme of Nate explains the IDs and what's this bird that he screws up. So so I made another timing error on this one as well. But this is a plover, obviously, that was photographed in Florida in October of last year. There are a number of plovers that you can see in Florida at that time of year. And from the angle that I saw here, I thought that bill looked awfully big, and so I threw out the suggestion of a Wilson's plover, but some other people corrected me. And it is indeed a snowy plover. It's a little paler on the back than you'd expect, and that bill, I think it's the angle is kind of screwy, but it is a little bit smaller than what you'd expect on a Wilson's plover, which has a massive kind of crab crushing bill.
It's got like a blob at the end
Yeah,
on Wilson's. It doesn't come to a fine point
yeah,
like it
that's a
does
good
on
point.
Snowy.
Yeah,
And of course, the gray legs rules out piping plover,
yes, that's right. That would be the other one. So if
as
you
does
saw
the
this,
Eldart bill.
yeah, and if you saw this in life, it would probably seem. This is one of those things like photos can be kind of difficult to identify birds because you can't get a sense of the size. Wilson's is a pretty big plover, and
Yeah.
Snowy is a very small one. So, yeah, Snowy plover on this bird, not Wilson's plover. Thank you for pointing that out. I
By
forget
the
who
way,
did that.
can I just say how much I love that you just flip back and forth between plover and plover seamlessly, just like
This is how I make
because
everybody angry.
because this is one of the questions we get a lot is how do you pronounce these bird names? And I think from now on, just flipping back and
Yeah,
forth between
it's
plover and
chaos.
plover, pileated and pileated, and just people throw up their hands and
Chaos is really the best option. I mean, that is the world we're living in these days. So we might as
absolute
well just lean
absolute.
into it, right?
I agree.
All right, so we got another shorebird here, and I really like this image because it shows two closely related sandpipers that are both actually moving quite a bit this time of year. This is a photo from Athens, Ohio, taken today, taken this morning.
Yeah.
Greg, what are you looking at here?
Well, a few things stand out. At first blush, a lot of birders would be like, "Oh, they look really similar. Are they male and female, or something like that?" Because one appears to be a little neater and a little more colorful, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not. They're two different species, um, and the bird in front is pretty easily identified. It has bright yellow legs, and it's a yellow legs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the bird in back and it's a lesser yellow legs. It has a relatively short
Yeah,
bill,
very dainty
and
head, kind of.
yeah,
Yeah, its
it doesn't
features
have
are.
much of a neck. I mean, greater yellow legs. One of the things that you kind of see with them is that they look kind of gawky. They have longer
Yeah,
necks and they're just kind of
real
bigger,
lanky. Yeah.
lanky. That's the word I was looking for. The bird in back is a solitary sandpiper, and you can notice a couple of things right off the bat. It has kind of dull greenish legs. Um, the back is darker, and it's got a pretty noticeable eye ring. And all
Yeah.
of those things, when you pay attention to them, are quite different from the yellow legs in front of it.
Absolutely. These are both sandpipers in the Tringa genus, which are kind of commonly grouped together as marsh pipers. The ones that we see, I mean, they're the ones that are kind of in muddy marshes a lot of times, kind of wading in flooded cow fields and things like that, kind of on the edges of mud flats and whatnot. Long-legged, kind of large-bodied, small-headed. We did both yellow legs are Tringa sandpipers. The
Yep.
solitary is a sandpiper, and then there's a number of old world Tringa sandpipers that can show up in North America from time to time. But the solitary sandpiper and the yellow legs are the ones that you're most likely to see right now across almost the entire continent, except maybe the
Yeah.
higher mountains. And solitary sandpiper, definitely a great bird to try and aspire to be these days.
And what's kind of
That was a
interesting
COVID
about them
joke.
too is that it,
Terrible, bad one.
is that
Yeah.
they usually are by themselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In looser flocks, definitely than the
Yeah,
than the yellow legs. Yeah,
they do just kind of hang out by themselves. Anyway,
yeah. All right. If you have any questions about bird identification, please let us know in the comments. We are simulcasting on Facebook in the What's This Bird group, on YouTube, on the ABA's YouTube channel, and on Twitter at ABA. You're welcome to join us at any of those places. We will try. If you ask us questions anywhere, we will try to keep up. We got a lot of stuff coming at us, mostly from Facebook though. So thank you for Facebook people for keeping us busy. Ben
yeah.
Lisdus out there. Hello, Ben.
Hey
How you
Ben.
doing? All right, so let's move on to our next slide here. Greg, this is a warbler, one of the early warblers, especially because this photo was taken in Manatee County, Florida. So
Yeah.
one of the Caribbean wintering warblers. And so a couple things going on here. We got a fledgling cardinal up there at the top, suggesting that, boy, cardinals are already nesting in the southern part of the continent, which is pretty wild. And what are we looking at on this warbler? What stands out to you?
Well, it's yellow,
It is very yellow.
and there aren't very many warblers that are yellow from top to bottom when viewed like
That's
this.
true. Yep.
Um, Yellow warbler comes
Appropriately
to
enough.
mind
Yeah.
immediately. But we talk a lot about and especially I think last week we were talking about sparrows and field sparrow, and we talked about open face,
Yeah.
kind of a plain, friendly, open face.
Hmm.
Um, this bird doesn't have that.
No, it's got
Uh,
that eye line.
yeah, yellow warbler has that plain, wide-eyed, friendly, open face
Yes.
with a very noticeable black bill set off from that. This bird's got kind of a cool kind of little mask going on, um, and there's really only one of our warblers that has that, and that is blue-winged
Blue
warbler,
winged warbler.
which
Even though you
is
can't see the
what
wings
this
here.
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Blue winged warbler. The first thing I see, it is on the small side of warblers, so it does that does stand out when you see them in the field. And obviously that black eye line, man, that is the thing you're looking for in blue winged warbler. I mean, there's not there are other warblers with yellow bodies and blue wings, but there's none that have the that face pattern that makes them extremely obvious when you see them in the field. And that's a relatively early migrant, so a lot of places in the eastern part of the continent are going to be seeing blue-winged warblers coming through in the next 10 days or so.
And one other thing to note here too is that the other bright yellow warbler that we might see coming in early is prothonotary,
Hmm.
or do you say
Absolutely.
prothonotary? Um,
Either one, both. Why not?
but but in
Halfway
but
through, change
viewed
up.
but viewed like this, even if we couldn't see its head, we'd probably be able to identify it because the prothonotary has bright white undertail coverts. That yellow
Definitely.
belly just
Yeah.
kind of stops abruptly, and and the undertail coverts, the vent area is just bright white.
Yeah, and a much bigger bill too. Thonotary warbler is a very
Yes.
large-billed bird, whereas blue-winged is the opposite extreme. It's very small, kind of needly. Used to be in the Vermivora genus, which was always kind of these little tiny small. But that's since been tossed out. I don't think there are any. I don't think it's in there anymore. What is it now?
Yeah.
Aureophilipus or something like that. Anyway, so here's another migrant that a lot of people are going to be seeing right now. This is from Birmingham, Alabama. This is a thrush, one of the Catharus thrushes. Oh yeah, John Lowry.
And
I'm just going back and noticing blue-winged warbler. John Lowry notes that in Michigan and in much of the kind of the middle part of the eastern, that's many directions, but where blue-winged and golden-winged intersect, there are a lot of hybrids. So you see a lot of that as well.
yep.
And so before we go into this thrush here, we do have a couple more questions that are worth grabbing. Wade Baker asks a question. He asks, saw what he thought was a pine warbler a few days ago, but it seemed very pale. Is this normal? Absolutely. Yeah, pine warbler is one of those kind of notoriously variable warblers. It runs the gamut from the extremely gold adult males to young females that can be extremely pale, extremely washed out. But if everything else checks the boxes for pine warbler, that being the kind of two wing bars, the kind of chunky body and short tail and big thick bill, that's exactly what it was. Yeah, pine warbler is very variable. It's a great
Yeah,
question.
and when we get first year females in the spring, like right now, I have a picture. I wish I'd known that question was coming up because I have a great series of pictures of a first year
Sorry.
female pine warbler taken in April, and it's just a gray nondescript
Yeah, boy. John
wing
says we should get
bars.
Nate to talk about pine warbler variability. I could talk for days about pine warbler variability because
Yeah,
here in North Carolina, we see a lot of that across the southeast where we have tons of pine warblers year round. Pine warblers come to feeders, especially in the winter, and they consistently confuse people because they are so variable. There's so many different looks they can
yeah,
give you. I saw a flock of pine warblers one time a few years ago, a bunch of them. This was in like October. And like I started just taking pictures of every pine warbler I could see, and like every single one was like at a different phase because there were a bunch of the first year birds as well, and it was crazy.
yeah,
I did a field guide, the ABA field guide to birds of the Carolinas, and pine warbler got a 2-page spread with like more
yeah.
images than any other species, just because like I've seen how people can get confused with pine warblers. Andrea Carpio asks a question about migration. Does the West Coast get many migrants passing through, or is it mostly centered around the Midwest and Eastern states? It's a great question. Bird migration is weighted significantly towards the east and the center of the continent. That does not mean that the West Coast does not get migrating warblers. They just, or migrating birds in general, they just don't get as many of them. And yeah, that's just a accident of geography for the most part.
Yeah, and I think the Pacific Coast tends to get it's very waterbird heavy. So
That's a good point.
a lot of ducks, a lot of shorebirds,
Yeah,
and then as you get into passerines and things, the number of possible species drops.
yeah.
You know, but yeah, it's also oh, I don't know where I was going to go with that. Just go on.
People tend. I mean, the thing about spring migration is that it is almost like synonymous with warblers across much of the continent. And if you're thinking
Right,
of spring migration in terms of warblers, then yeah, the West Coast is the western part of the continent does not get the warblers that we do in
right.
the east. But you get a lot of other cool migration, a lot of other cool things happening. Thrush migration is really cool over there. Hummingbirds, like Anna's hummingbirds
Hummingbirds.
and Rufus hummingbirds and Allen's hummingbirds coming up the coast. Raptor migration is frequently better in the west than it is, or at least more diverse than it is in
Yep.
the east. So there's a lot going on, and I mean, there's definitely a cultural birding bias to migration, especially spring migration. That it ends up being all about warblers, and the spring, the east part of the continent definitely makes out better on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Spencer England mentions Herbert warbler. We don't get that at all. That's a cool looking warbler too.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll go back to our little slide presentation here. We got a cool thrush here this photo was taken in Birmingham, Alabama. We have some guesses in the comments. Ralph Yoder says gray cheeked thrush. Yeah, it does look a little like a gray cheeked thrush. It's got the very plain face. It's got a very cold gray brown, cold grayish brown across the body. But it's still a tad early for gray cheeked across much of the eastern part of the continent, although they are starting to come in. The big bulk of that migration is going to be it's going to be towards the end of April, early part of May. But there is one field mark here that you can see in that upper corner bird a lot better, and you can see that reddish tail. Even in a kind of poor, blurry photo, you can see that reddish tail. And if you see a reddish tail on a Catharus thrush like that, that always makes it a hermit thrush.
Yeah, and a couple of other things to note here. This is a really good example of how one photo can totally fake you out.
Absolutely.
Because the
Yes.
photo on the right, if you look at it closely, and if I pulled this into Photoshop and brightened it up just a little bit, the color on the rump and the top of the
Yeah.
tail would be
stand
more
out a little more.
noticeable.
Yeah.
But that branch is cutting across the brightest part of the tail, so you
Yes.
can't see it. So
Yeah.
you assume it's the same color.
That's a great point.
It kind of makes it really fakes you out. And this is a great example where two images of the same bird immediately clears it up. And one other
Yeah.
thing with hermit thrush is that they habitually do that
Oh yeah.
dropped wing, raised tail. They
Yep.
just raise their tail and flip it down slowly to show off that rufous tail.
I can almost see that bird doing it in that left photo in my head.
Yep.
Yeah. John asked a good question about telling pine warbler from chipping sparrow by ear. That's a tough one. I hear a lot of them. I hear a lot of both of them, right? Especially right now. Walking around my neighborhood, we have pine warblers all over the place and chipping sparrows singing from people's yards. It's like one of those things where you get maybe 80 to 85% of them where you can tell. Chipping is a little bit quicker. It's a little bit drier. Pine warbler has a real bubbly feel to it, at least to my ear. And so that's how I can usually tell. And like I said, 80, 85% of the birds I can identify pretty confidently, but then there's that 15% that is probably like I can't tell, especially when they're singing from a similar place. Like if it's singing from a yard, like low down, chipping sparrow. If it's singing from the top of a pine tree, pine warbler. But you don't always get those sort of habitat clues. My earbud's about to fall out here.
Yeah, and chipping sparrow can be kind of bubbly and melodious like pine warbler on occasion, but pine warbler can be dry and rattly like a chipping sparrow quite frequently.
Yeah.
And you can listen to one bird and they'll switch it up. They'll
Yeah.
do a nice, bubbly, perfect, pine warbler song, and then they'll fly to another perch and do this dry chipping sparrow like song.
Yeah, great questions. Keep them coming. Nathaniel Sharp has a video from an ornithology professor there that he says is helpful for differentiating those tough trillers. Yeah, I mean, and it is and we're talking about chipping sparrow and pine warbler, but those are not the only ones. I'll tell you, dark-eyed junco, when they start singing before they leave in kind of early April, at least in the southeast, they have a song that's very similar to that as well. And of course, later in the spring, worm-eating warbler can have typically a very insecty, very extremely dry, quick trill, but they can be really difficult as well. Will Broussard says similar. How would you characterize the difference between chipping and palm warbler? Palm warbler is another one. Palm warbler feels weak to me. Like it's like they're not putting enough behind it. It feels thinner.
Yeah.
But like we're talking about things that are, we make these sort of, we have these descriptions, but they don't always sound like that to everybody. These are sort of very subjective things sometimes. And some people have better hearing than others. And so they're hearing maybe aspects of the song that other people can't hear. It's tough. It's tough, especially those trilling kind of songs. Larkwire, again, if we can give a plug to Larkwire again, it's a great program.
Yep.
They have trill things as well. And if, you'll either learn them or you'll be incredibly frustrated and never want to listen to them again. So either one.
Yeah. And with telling those apart is, when you're birding in an area, let's say you're birding in an area with a lot of chipping sparrows, and you'll hear the variations of chipping sparrows. And then one of them just doesn't quite sound right. And it may be a palm warbler, like you
Yeah.
said, it just doesn't give it enough juice. And I
Yeah.
think that juncos sound like that. They
Yeah.
don't. They're kind of disjointed, like they're just kind of halfway into it, and
Yes.
just like, yeah, I'm just gonna do this for the hell of it.
And this is especially true
Whereas,
when they're kind of tuning up at the beginning of the season too. Like they're kind of
yeah,
working their way into that full throated Junko song.
whereas chipping sparrows are up there, and they mean it. They're and pine warblers too. They really mean it.
They belt it. Yeah, they're belters.
Yep.
So let's see. Ralph Yoder asks a good question. What is the first thrush? Now you got to understand that both Greg and I are speaking from sort of an eastern part of the continent perspective. The migration timing is slightly different when you get west of the Great Plains, but I can tell from where I am, we have hermit thrushes all winter. So hermit thrush is a overwintering bird in the southeast. So they'll stick around for a while into late April frequently, though they'll really start to peter out about this time of year. And then Gray cheek Swainson's vary all kind of push through. I'm thinking Catharus thrushes, wood thrush in there
Right.
as well. Wood thrush will come next. They start arriving about now. So wood thrushes will start picking up in the southeast at least where right about so people on my listserv have been reporting them. And then in that last week of April, first week of May, that's when like the long distance thrushes, so very gray cheek Swainson's all winter in Amazon, South America, and they come
Yep.
barreling through kind of all together over the course of maybe 2 weeks, and then they're gone. That's how we see thrush migration. Where I am, it's a little bit different. Where Greg is,
No, not necessarily. I mean, it's what you described is pretty much the same. I mean, I think Swainson's and wood thrush tend to show up here before the rush of gray cheek. I mean, gray cheeks
gray cheeks are
definitely
very
are
late.
the
Yeah, they're
last.
late. Yeah.
They're the last ones to come through. Um, and Veery is a breeding bird here, and they're not a really common breeding bird. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we do see them obviously as migrants, but then they're also setting up territory, and just they're not flocking as much as gray cheeks are,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hope that answers your
or
question.
Swainsons.
Yeah. Hope that answers your question. We'll go to our image. We got one more image for you before we go straight to questions or call it a week. We got a woodpecker here, and this one little confusing. This is a Long Island, New York, taken yesterday. This is one of those birds that. Well, so we'll say it's either a downy or a hairy, right? Those are the two very similar looking woodpeckers
Hmm.
and across much of the continent. And this one made me look a couple, maybe
Yeah,
give it a second look. But I'm
and
still. Go ahead, Greg.
no. What? So finish your thought.
I'm thinking like so when I think about downy and hairy, I basically assume that they're all downies unless because when I see a hairy, I'm like, oh, obviously a hairy. That bill is huge. I mean, they're the size of a red-bellied woodpecker, and their bill is almost as big. Like they're very, very obvious. And if I'm questioning myself about a bird, it's almost certainly a downy. Almost always a downy.
Yep. Couple of things that sort of subconsciously make you lean to downy, and that is the size of the branch it's on. And
Another good
especially
point.
you can see some of the leaves coming out. This isn't a really big bird. I mean,
Yeah,
hairy woodpecker, like you said, is the size of a red-bellied woodpecker, and
it's a
they
big
like
bird.
big trees.
Yeah.
They like big trees, and they hammer away at the trunks.
Mm-hmm.
They don't work the limbs, the outer limbs,
Yeah.
or branches like this. But the other thing that's going on with this bird, and I think that's confusing,
Mm-hmm.
is that downy woodpecker has really big nasal tufts. It's got this big white
Mm-hmm.
tuft over the nostrils at the base of the bill that makes the bill look shorter.
Exactly.
And this bird's nasal tufts are not very well
It's like they're
developed.
gone. Yeah.
They're gone. You can
Yeah.
see the nostril.
Yeah.
And that makes the bill look bigger. I think if this bird had more normal nasal tufts, there wouldn't be a question because the bill would look like a little toothpick, kind of a spike,
Yeah.
and look short. So yeah, this is a downy woodpecker.
Yep, totally. And Jay Worley mentions in the comments you can almost see the two tail bars down there on the undertail. You might be able to. If I pulled this up a little bit, well, maybe it doesn't crop quite as well. I can't see that very well.
Yeah, I couldn't see it either. I didn't want to mention it because it's not obvious.
Yeah, yeah, but that is another thing you can look for
Yes.
on those birds is that hairy woodpecker has entirely white outer tail feathers, and downy has usually a few black marks on there. Sometimes not very many, and sometimes they can be hard to see. But for the most part, it'll be on there. It's one of those things. It's like what was the field mic I was talking about that the gape with the stints, right? It's one of those things
Right.
where if you see it, it's like it's a good clue rather than like the slam dunk ID thing that you're looking
Exactly.
for. It's the way it is with a lot of these field marks. It's like you're looking at the sort of the entire bird and taking it all in and kind of weighing different field marks differently, and it's the whole kind of gestalt of the bird that causes you to come to that identification.
It is, and it's interest, and it's also good to keep in mind, and it's just interesting that in the general scheme of things in woodpeckers, Downy and hairy are not that closely related. They're
That's
not.
true. That's one of the real funny things about those two birds.
They just evolved to
Yeah,
look like each other,
yeah.
and they inhabit different types of forest and different. They
Hmm.
do different things in the different types of habitat, and they do different kinds of things in the forest. Now, of course, at feeders, um, which generally houses yards and things, neighborhoods represent edges, so you'll get both species together.
Yeah.
Um, but typically out in more wild areas away from civilization, or at least homes and stuff, uh, Downy and hairy, they don't. You won't really see them in the same place very often.
Yeah, that's true. Funny thing about hairy woodpeckers is that I almost always see them associating with pileated woodpeckers or pileated woodpeckers, whichever one you want. They really like to hang
Exactly,
around with them. They're like it's like a big brother little brother relationship. Like if
they
I see
do.
a pileated woodpecker or I hear a pileated woodpecker, I almost always start looking around for a hairy woodpecker, and I'd say better than half the time there's a hairy woodpecker lurking around somewhere in the vicinity.
I think that's absolutely right, and
Yeah.
that's on our big days, that's something when we see one, we
Right.
always subconsciously kind of, and we look for them in the same habitat.
Yeah, exactly. And hairy can be a tough bird to find across. I mean, they're present, but they're in low densities. It feels like, so they can be hard.
And
You don't
they
always see them.
no, and when they decide to be noisy, you can't miss them, but
Hmm.
they don't do that very often.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting bird. All right. So if you've got any questions for us in the comments, please let us know. Otherwise, we are getting close to 3/4 of an hour. So we're probably going to wrap this up for next week. But once again, thank you all for joining us. We have a great group here in What's This Bird, and we're excited to promote that group. Oh, Spencer England says from Tennessee but live in Colorado now and misses the pileated. I miss those too. Those are fancy, great birds. Chris Ortega
Yeah,
has a question though. Speaking earlier of West Coast migration, he's saying Allen Rufus hummingbirds now. I know Rufus can show green on the back, but can Allens ever show orange on the back? I don't think so. I think that
I
is
don't
one of
think
those
so
things
either.
where if you see green, it's a good, it might be an Allen's, but it might also be a Rufus. But if you see orange on the back, it's always a Rufus, right? That's the way that
Right.
I believe it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Otherwise, those are two extremely difficult, classic tough ID for those two birds.
Yeah.
Christian Jobin says hello from southern Quebec.
Hello,
Hello,
Christian.
or bonjour, I guess. We have big flocks of blackbirds, grackles. Is it worth your time to look for brewers in there? Ooh. I don't usually associate brewers with big flocks of grackles and blackbirds down here. So we have big flocks of grackles and blackbirds that overwinter here in the southeast part of the continent. And I don't usually see brewers in those big flocks. And you get like yellow-headed in those big flocks. So it might be worth checking them. But brewers are like doing their own thing whenever they're around. They'll hang out at like, muddy cow fields and stuff like that, and they won't be with the giant flocks of blackbirds for the most part. But that's just my experience, and that may not be the same as other people.
Yeah, we the blackbirds kind of tend to segregate a little bit. The grackles kind of stay to themselves.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, I mean you'll get mixed flocks every once in a while, but typically the grackles kind of keep to themselves. And brewers, when there's a mixed flock of redwings and rusties feeding out in a cornfield or something, look through them because that is typically where we will find brewers.
Is
A
that
little
right?
bit, yeah, a little bit later, um, when the Red Wings are kind of taken out of the mix a little bit more, the brewers will tend to be more into agricultural habitat.
Mm-hmm.
And rusties, rusties are woodland birds. It's
Yeah, it's
kind of it's
swampy
all
woods. Yeah,
it's always kind of neat to be like in the bottomlands along the Mississippi in April,
yeah,
and just really deep, heavy, swampy woods, and come across a flock of rusty blackbirds down on the
yeah.
moss-covered, wet stuff, just working their way along the bottom quietly. You think of blackbirds being out in the fields and stuff, and no, they're bog birds.
Yeah, totally. And they're frequently pretty quiet too. Although they do start singing
Exactly.
this time of year. I have seen them singing at least where I live. You can hear them sometimes. And they have a real kind of rusty gate funny song.
Yeah.
That's very distinctive. Um, yeah. If anyone has any other questions, please let us know. Otherwise, I do have one question. One I did want to acknowledge at least someone on Periscope. Campaign Poppy I at Campaign Poppy I says, for amateur bird watchers, what is the best way to start learning birds by their calls? We've said it a couple times already. Larkwire is the way to go. It's an app that you can find on iOS. Unfortunately, it's not available on Android phones, but it's about $9. It feels like we're doing a Larkwire commercial. We should ask them
I
for
think we're gonna have to
sponsorship for
start. I,
this.
I think we're gonna have to start. I gotta go talk to Michael about
That's
this.
right.
It's a box here, man.
That's right. So it
Spend
essentially
more
turns
time
learning.
talking. We spend more time talking about Larkwire than we have joining the ABA, which you
It's
should
true.
do if you enjoy
Absolutely. Yeah.
these.
ava.org/join. We do have regular memberships and e-memberships if you would like to get the Birding magazine online. If that doesn't bother you, you don't need it in the mail, you can get it online. Yeah, aba.org/join. Please consider joining the ABA. We love to if you enjoy these sorts of programs, I feel like I'm doing a PBS thing, but if you enjoy these sorts of programs, please consider
You are.
supporting us by joining the ABA or donating to the ABA. We certainly appreciate it. Vicky Morgan has a question. She asks, have you read the paper where they can use very nesting times to predict the severity of the hurricane season? Do you know if there are people looking at them this year? That's a great question, Vicky, because I actually interviewed Kit Heckscher, the researcher from Delaware, Northern Delaware, who is actually doing that research on one of the episodes of the American Birding Podcast last year, and I can probably even tell you which episode that was if you are interested in that sort of thing. Hold on just a second. Let's see, Veery Meteorology last September with Kit Heckscher, because there's his Veeries that he studies on this little plot are actually pretty good at predicting hurricane seasons. It's really remarkable. I don't know if people are looking at him this year. I know he had some issues last year, so he didn't get the full gamut of data that it was able to actually predict. So he didn't make like an official prediction. This year, I don't know, because of this COVID thing. It's really wrecking a lot of people's field seasons, and so it might have been. I don't know how he's doing. Probably worth dropping him a line, but yeah, it's great. So listen to that interview. It was in last September. It's the production number is 0318. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, American Birding Podcast, and I talked to him about that very thing. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, Joy Navarette asks, "What about Android phones? Any suggestions? Do you have any suggestions, Greg, on that? I don't know any off the top of my head."
I mean, nothing that functions like Larkwire. And again, just Michael O'Brien, if you're watching this, just think, this could be yours. ABA What's This Bird Live, brought to you by Larkwire, the best way to learn bird songs.
But if you're looking for there are a lot of cool like books out there that kind of help you learn bird songs. One of the best ones was Nathan Peplow's Bird Songs of Eastern and Western North America. He's got two. It's from Peterson Field Guides. They put out a birdsong book. It's got like spectrograms of the birds, which, if you read music or if you can even kind of intuit music a little bit. It's a very useful way to learn those notes because it visualizes them. And he also is working really hard at sort of establishing terminology, standard terminology for how we describe bird songs, which is something that Greg and I both didn't do very well when we were talking about pine warbler versus chipping sparrow earlier. But Nathan Peplo's books are also a great resource as well.
There's some other really great resources. The Sibley app has sound files,
Yes.
as do most birding apps. But the Sibley app is really good because it lets you know where that was recorded.
Yeah.
And a website that you can absolutely get lost in. Every time I go to just sort of either share something in What's This Bird or some other Facebook group where I'm helping somebody identify a bird by sound, and you want to pull up a similar xenocanto.com, which is it com or org? I think it's com. That's XENO-CANTO. And it is a library of bird sounds. It is .org, xenocanto.org. It is a library of bird sounds from around the world that is just massive. Yeah. But what's really neat is that, okay, so let's say you're in Indiana or wherever, and you want to study pine warbler. They have you can go in there and click the map and see pine warbler recordings from your area, and then filter those and listen to those versus other areas, because birds do have regional dialects. And then, of course, you can just go down the list. It's an amazing resource, and it's a great way to brush up on familiar species and learn things that you're unfamiliar with.
And you can actually, so it's all crowdsourced, and it's all Collective Commons. So you can download those sound files and put them on your phone, create a little playlist if you're wanting to study or whatever. It's a remarkable website. Community,
absolutely,
I should say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Lisa Kassler notes that you can purchase Larkwire for your computer.
Oh,
I did not know that. That's great.
That's fairly new.
Yeah. Let's see here. Chris Ortega notes that he doesn't know Larkwire, but he uses Merlin in the field to check bird songs. Wow, I didn't know Merlin had that capability, but that does not surprise me that they have it, that they could do that. So there's another one. Lots of stuff in the comments. If you're curious, sounds like a lot of people have figured out different ways to kind of crack that nut. So yeah, very good, very good. All right, so we are almost to the full hour. Greg, I think we're probably gonna turn it off here. But if there's anything else you wanted to say?
Oh, sorry. I was just laughing because while we were wrapping up here, a message flew across my computer screen here, and the Townsend's warbler in outside Chicago, the original, the person who found it didn't give really any good idea of where it was, just that it was in a big forest preserve. And helpful. People have been looking for it. And of course, the one person who we all kind of knew would find it did.
Nathaniel Sharp in the comments says, thoughts on the Connecticut Townsend's warbler. I know, it's cool. Good for Connecticut. I think it's a first state record.
Yeah.
Good on him.
It's a good bird.
All right, so we're gonna say goodbye for this week. We'll be back next week at around 1:00 Eastern time. For another one of these programs. So hope everyone out there is staying safe and staying healthy. Please consider joining the ABA, aba.org/join if you enjoy these sorts of programs. And we'll catch y'all later next week.
Otherwise, yeah, and also one last thing before you go. Click over to aba.org, aba.org/live. And check out the middle of next week, Nate. You're going to be doing Virtual Bird Club with Jody Allaire. That should be really
Jody Allaire from Birds Canada is going to be our guest on the Virtual Bird Club next week, 8:00 p.m. There will also be simulcast on the ABA's Facebook page, on Twitter, and on YouTube as well, and aba.org/live, as Greg says. So definitely check that out.
Right on.
All right. See you, everybody.
Bird on.
Stay safe.